quilt backs add character, interest, a little surprise to a quilt. If scraps or rejected blocks from the quilt top are used, it can help manage your scraps or at least use the quilt fabric to its fullest. Otherwise, leftovers often languish in bins or drawers only to be forgotten or worse yet, wind up in the trash. For small quilts, I use one width of fabric, cut on the bolt fold, separate those two pieces to fill in how much I need for a 50-inch, more or less, baby quilt or wall hanging. I like to lay the width of fabric on my quilt top to see which orientation I like better. Do I like it the lengthwise or widthwise? A lot of times it depends which way I want to mount it in the long arm machine, so the selvages are on the leaders. It just might depend on the top. This time I chose the lengthwise. It was almost wide enough, but I needed enough to mount into the long arm. I chose this orange, and then I liked the idea of framing it in a green. Then it would be in the same color family or color story as the top of the quilt. I just cut on the fold, on the bolt fold, so I'd have a nice straight edge with which to attach my other accent pieces. Then I carefully stitched. I used a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I always make sure, I use my stiletto, make sure both the bottom and the top fabrics are meeting at the edge, so I have the full amount of seam allowance, and I use a smaller stitch length, 1.5 to 2, so I have a nice strong seam. If you're not so sure about your accuracy or stitching abilities, it's recommended to make a 1/2 inch seam allowance just to make sure you have a nice strong back. A little tip for any strip piecing, make sure you set the seam up and down motion. Avoid using any pushing side to side motion on when you use an iron, so you don't press a curve in your strip piecing. Finger press first to make sure I have the full amount of fabric going over that seam allowance, and make sure the seam allowance is to the side I want it to be, not twisted. Then using the point of the iron, go straight down that line. Once I have the piece back completed, I lay the top to make sure that it's the size I need, that it'll work. And here is my finished quilted project. Dina from the Stripology Quickies book. It's a crib size. It's 47.5 by 55.5. I just did an all over swirl design, and it has dream puff batting in it. It's not bound yet, but I wanted you to be able to see it. I just finished it.